Hey there. My name is Christina Stoltz, and I am head mistress to Ploome, a community-driven fitness boutique using Pilates to change the world one killer workout at a time. I am a Dartmouth 2006-2007 alumna, and in 2006, I was fortunate enough to participate in a program called Telling My Story, in which Dartmouth undergraduates and inmates at a local women's correctional facility came together to write and perform a play and then give testimonials of their experience both in and out of the prison. I'm here today to share my story with you, and I hope you enjoy it. My name is Christina Stoltz, and 12 years ago, the Telling My Story program saved my life. I've worked all over the world as an activist, an educator, as a fitness enthusiast, and a female entrepreneur. And I can say with certainty that the time I spent at the Southeast State Correctional Facility in Windsor, Vermont, really informed the politics that I take with me today, the ways in which I interact with my clients and my friends, and most importantly, it informed my personal perspective on who I am in the world and how I want to work to shape it every day. A background on me. I'm a Dartmouth graduate. I graduated in 2006, did my master's at Dartmouth in 2007, and then I pursued an international human rights and activist career throughout Russia and Central Asia, primarily in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. I fell on some hard times in Kyrgyzstan, and as a result, I ended up back here in the States. Serendipitously, I landed in Philadelphia. In Philly, I wanted to continue the work that I began in Central Asia. And so I started my own nonprofit organization, and I built a fitness boutique dedicated to helping men and women celebrate their lives, their bodies, their strength, transform themselves and their communities, and give back to a larger good. So, telling my story. As a Dartmouth undergraduate, I stumbled upon this program at a time when I was really struggling to understand who I was. At the time that I fell into telling my story, I was struggling with a sexual assault I experienced as an undergraduate. It was a really challenging time because Dartmouth, this center for intellectual curiosity, this hotbed of privilege and power and wealth and exclusion, also fostered this wonderful sense of inclusivity and creativity, and it brought to life all of these things that made me feel rich as an artist and an academic and a budding activist. Trying to negotiate all of those identities with the assault that I suffered was really challenging at a time in my life when I was still developing the language and the tools to explain what happened, to understand it from a social and a personal perspective, and to utilize that moment in my history to help inspire others. So I meet up with Patty Hernandez, and my life has instantly changed. The program allowed me to very intimately explore that particular moment in my history, a moment of vulnerability, of shame, a moment of self-loathing and true sadness. The prison gave me a place to be honest for the first time with myself. It gave me a place to cut the bullshit and really work on the person who I was and the person who I wanted to become. As an undergraduate at Dartmouth, that can be really challenging when you're constantly defining yourself by the things that you're studying, the things with which you associate and those that you do not, whether it's the Greek system or specific clubs. There are so many opportunities to grow as a person in that undergraduate environment, and there are so many pressures to really box yourself into an identity that might not fit for you, might not be right for you, and might not really identify with your personal politics. Telling my story was a moment in time when I had to sit down with a very harsh reality I was facing. I had to be honest with myself about my own story, and I had to use the tools at my disposal to build community around that. In 2007, as a graduate student at Dartmouth, I was given the opportunity to teach at the Southeast State Correctional Facility in Windsor. And in my teaching, I was able to expand the Telling My Story program to really take an academic and a pedagogical approach to that work, to that art of performance, to the act of storytelling. 2007 gave me a chance to work with women in the prison and really identify ways in which theory and context come together to build activism and action. In short, by taking my time and telling my story and translating it into a teaching position at the prison, I was empowered and gained a sense of ownership and agency. I held on to my story. I celebrated it in a way I never had before, and I was able to take that story and bring it together in this cacophony of voices with other women who had similar stories and were struggling to find the same words and language to really share their experience in a way that felt honest and hopeful, and in a way that allowed us to really approach theory from an academic perspective, and still a perspective that was relevant to our own personal struggles and also to the struggles we faced as women in 2007 going through it. After my time at the prison, I then moved to Russia, and I was able to tell my story in a whole new way. There, I was working as a human trafficking advocate, crisis intervention advocate, I must say, for women who were trafficked. What that means is that I was providing direct service to women who were being trafficked into, through, and around Russia. And in that direct service capacity, I was every day inundated with these personal narratives of tragedy and triumph. And it was in those moments of sheer vulnerability, in those moments of painstaking honesty, that I was able to connect with other people, that I was able to share a bit of myself from a place of strength and from a place of courage, that I was able to gain strength and courage from the stories of these women who were so brave to come forward, who were so brave to pursue help, and who were really struggling to receive the care, both legal and social and psychological, all of this care that they needed that they couldn't get. It was a really challenging time. It was a real struggle for me because fresh out of college, fresh out of that privileged, heteronormative kind of environment, you say to yourself, well, holy hell, this is the world, and it is as messed up as I thought it was, but now I'm not looking at it through the looking glass. I've taken the little blue pill, and I've fallen down the rabbit hole, and this is where we are now. The prison program gave me a chance to step outside of my life on campus and put my activism to action. It gave me a chance to actually say, I am me, here's where I am in my life, and this is what I can give right now. It allowed me to take ownership of my story. It allowed me to cultivate a sense of agency that I carried with me to Russia, and that I was able to translate to a whole other group of women and of kids who were really working on finding themselves in that defining moment when your whole world gets turned upside down. And I know that moment. That moment rocked me in undergrad. It completely shifted the way I saw Dartmouth, the way I interacted with my peers, with my professors. I could have taken that moment, and it could have become something else. You have chance, and you have choice. And I think they really work hand in hand. Patty's program and telling my story allowed me to take a chance and to make a choice. After my work in Russia, I then moved to Kyrgyzstan, I was on a Fulbright at that time. In Russia, I was supported by Dartmouth, thank God, through some postgraduate scholarships. So the college really stuck by me, and they said, hey, keep telling your story, and let's now head back to Central Asia. So I'm in Kyrgyzstan on my Fulbright, and I'm continuing my work in crisis intervention advocacy, in direct service with survivors of human trafficking. There, I'm also teaching as a sociology professor at the American University of Central Asia. So again, I was able to live in both worlds simultaneously, the world of activism and the world of academia. And I really like to be in both. It's how my mind works, and it's really where my politics are. In Kyrgyzstan, things really started to come together. And by teaching in the university and running direct service programming at the Crisis Center, I was able to put all of my work as an undergrad and graduate student, all of my love for and work in telling my story into action. And sadly, things shifted for me in 2009. At that time, my story changed. Unfortunately, I was on a jog, and I ran into 5 guys whose sole intention was to brutally gang rape me, cut me up into little pieces, and throw me over this overpass. But before they could, I was able to fight them off, and I survived. Survive is a strong word, and it has a lot of nuance. There are many shades of gray. But in that moment, at that time, when my story changed, I still had the smallest, ever so smallest, glimmer of hope that it wasn't the end. The next day after my assault, literally the next day, I was jumped at 7:20 on a Tuesday night, and I walked into that university after being in the hospital and the interrogation room all night. I walked right up to my students, hands in casts, face all mangled, and I told them that this was the moment that we were going to really talk about bystander intervention. So imagine this 20-something Caucasian American coming into this Muslim university, beaten and battered and pretty broken psychologically. That was a lot for my students to take in. That was a real switch of power and privilege. That was a moment that was really empowering for me. It was a sense of real vulnerability that it took my assault in college to a whole new place. Now I was in this position of leadership to really help guide this academic, this pedagogical discussion of violence and of responsibility, of the same violence that I just fell victim to 12 hours before. Without telling my story and without the ability to understand the power of narrative and the hope, the strength, the honesty that it can bring, I wouldn't have been able to get through that first lecture. There's nothing harder than looking at someone and realizing that just being in their presence is causing their world to unravel. It was a lot for my students to take in. That was a big moment for them. It was as big for them as it was for me. From that moment, things got tough. They got tough psychologically. Physically, I was getting better, but it was taking time. I was really broken, more so than I wanted to lead on, more so than I wanted to believe. And the crisis center I was working at the time, I approached and I asked if I could run a movement-based program that would be strictly using music and mats and some Pilates programs that I found online. The crisis center didn't know, but at the time, I was trying to rehab myself because I didn't want to go home to the US. My assault happened on October 17th, and I wasn't scheduled to fly back for Christmas vacation until December 5th. On the one hand, I couldn't fly back because I was too jacked up. On the other hand, I didn't want to fly back because I wanted my students to know I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't embarrassed, and that I was going to stick with them and hold my head up high throughout that city, even though, on the back end, psychologically, my world was really crumbling. The crisis center, of course, they said, sure, go ahead. run your program, tell your story. And so the women I was working with at the crisis center, we pulled out some mats that were actually these like crappy cushions of these couches that were in the crisis center. And I need you to understand, crisis centers in Central Asia, not like crisis centers in the States. So typically it's a room as big as my fitness studio, which we'll get to in a minute. And it housed about 12 to 15 people in addition to a staff of 5 to 10. So you got a lot of people literally living 24/7 and working here, right? So talk about a breakdown of space, again, of power, of privilege. These walls were coming down all the time, right? There was no boundary really to where your personal life and your professional life kind of began and ended in this crisis center. The first Pilates program we ran, I put on Cirque du Soleil's Verikai album, which I highly recommend. And a bunch of women from Uzbekistan, from villages in Tajikistan, from rural Kyrgyzstan and I, we hit these mats and they followed me through a movement-based sequence. No words. I'm fluent in Russian, but the women I was working with at the time didn't speak it. We communicated through movement. We let the music do the talking, and we let our bodies and our minds really find one another in a symbiosis that you can really only understand if you've struggled with a physical trauma or psychological trauma and you've lost that connection of mind, body, and spirit. The program was powerful and it grew really quickly at the crisis center. It was an amazing opportunity to take my story and turn it into something actionable. Fast forward a few months, and sadly, the country I was living in, Kyrgyzstan, the city Bishkek, its capital, erupts in civil war. It was a real bummer because, and I don't mean to say that lightly, it was really hard to watch a war happen around you. Torches and burning and guns and tanks and people being killed and stoned and hatred. And again, this crisis of masculinity erupting around me for what felt like the third time in my adolescent life. I'm not even 25, and already I've seen the most brutal and hateful of things coupled with the most beautiful and hopeful of experiences. How do you really understand that story? How do you put that narrative into words? How do you even share that experience with other people? I leave Kyrgyzstan. Before I do, sadly, I unfortunately fell into another situation in which I had been abducted and was able to escape, which was awesome. And again, I don't say that lightly, but in looking back, it's almost hard to not see yourself in some ways as this really crazy mini superhero when you realize you're being stolen by a man in a cab whose sole objective is to take you to this market and rape you and leave you for dead. And the only option you have is to literally hurl your body into oncoming traffic at a 4-way intersection, which is what I did. And then I stood up like Rambo with my computer bag and my MacBook Pro still, my MacBook Pro still in place, still alive, still working, thinking like, oh, okay, this is normal. Of course, it wasn't normal. It was a really serious situation, and it was a situation precipitated by a crisis of masculinity in Central Asia that had unwound and told its story on me in a couple of different ways. So following that experience, that's when I left. And I didn't want to go, but I had to. When I got back to the States, I wanted to continue the work that I started in Central Asia. I was really connected to and committed to this Pilates-based movement program. And I was really struggling with understanding how my assault in college, my physical assault in Bishkek, and my attempted abduction, how these narratives were going to, how I was going to live with them, how I was going to swallow them every day and bring power and life and truth out of them. So I decided the only way to do that was to create my own organization, a nonprofit that was dedicated to providing support and service to survivors of trauma by utilizing movement therapy. And I wanted to take that a step further and open up this space of movement and narrative and performance and transformation to a larger audience. So I opened a for-profit fitness boutique whose goal is to meet people where they are in their health and wellness and fitness journey. A fitness boutique whose goal is to celebrate inner strength, to build community, and to really honor all of the hard work that goes into building a strong sense of self and really inspiring others to greatness. So in 2010, Rec One, my nonprofit organization, was born. And in 2011, Ploome, my fitness studio, opened. And they've been operating ever since. Right now, we are in Ploome. I can say that the journey has been a long one, and that oftentimes people will ask, "Oh, you teach Pilates. I thought you were a sociology professor." Or I love this one, "Oh, you worked at the United Nations and now you're a Pilates instructor." As if somehow I stumbled into this studio by accident. Like, oops, this is what I'm going to do with my story. No. There is real power in movement, and there is real power in narrative. And Patty's program, this program, it gave me the voice that I needed to really identify who I was as a person, to understand and appreciate and absolve those really terrible things that happened to me, and to turn those stories into really strong foundations and spaces for growth where I could really step into who I want to become, and I can invite other people into that conversation. Ploome has been a real learning lesson for me. When you step into the studio, you think, okay, well, it's another space of what could be argued white privilege, right? It's expensive, it's Pilates, it's fitness. But people need to move, and moving is another form of narrative. The clients and community that I have here, they inspire me to do what I do every day. They inspire me to be honest and genuine. They inspire me to tell my story, and they help me find a sense of agency in my own daily activism. People have stories. Everyone's story is different, but we all want to love who we are at the end of the day, and we want to be loved by the community around us. Building community, fostering relationships, growing strong together is what we need to be doing. Now, especially in this political climate, now especially as the tides are turning on how we interact with one another. Half of you are probably sitting, blogging or texting or sending off some Snapchat or Instagram right now about this story, as opposed to really being present in this moment. And so, Ploome, as a fitness boutique, as a space for strength, and as a space to grow, has really helped me shift my narrative. It's helped me find strength in the past and hope in the future. I bring with me today a box that the women at the Southeast State Correctional Facility had made for me when I finished teaching there in 2007, before I moved to Russia in 2008. And this box was really special to me because not only did they make it in the woodworking shop, and they signed it, they painted it and signed it, but they told me that it was a space, it was a box, right? It was a place to hold my dreams. And that meant the world to me. At a time when I was selling off everything I owned to move to a foreign country I'd never spent that much time in, to pursue a life of activism and a life of academics that I was ready for but unsure about, the women at the prison, they gave me hope. And they made me feel less alone. I've kept this box on my bookshelf since they gave it to me in 2007, and I have no intention of losing it or letting it go. And every time I open it, it reminds me to put a new dream inside and to continue to fill it with all of the love and the joy that telling my story has brought to me and to so many other people. So in closing, I say this. If you have the opportunity to tell your story, then you better do it, because life is about connections. It's about the community that we build together. It's about consciously stepping into who you are, into growing as a person, and taking those moments of setback and those moments of struggle and turning them into something rich and ripe with possibility, with hope, and with a fierce sense of accomplishment, knowing that today is today and tomorrow will come, and there's so much opportunity in that. So I thank you for letting me tell my story. I appreciate everyone who's participated in the Telling My Story program and built this voice for today, for tomorrow, a voice that really takes us from the past into our future. And I look forward to see where the stories of tomorrow lead us. I hope you have a wonderful day. And again, thanks for listening. Bye.